Alice, let's get started. Ellie, I actually seem to recall you started working on the Hill just days after Wordfest when we both happened to be at the Banff Centre for the Arts. What was it that drew you to start this novel?
Oh, there's several different things that were going through my head when I started writing this novel, but I think it's no coincidence that I was sitting at the Banff Centre surrounded by the wild, that had a definite influence on the book. But there was a number of things. One of them was watching my oldest daughter walk into a dojo, and she was seeing jujitsu for the first time, and it was sort of a room full of boys, and she was just sort of young, and at that age she didn't think twice about joining something that just boys were doing. So I thought, isn't that kind of interesting that, you know, she doesn't know yet about sort of gender stereotypes and what she should or shouldn't do. She wasn't fazed by the fact that it was all boys. So there was something interesting about that. And then I started wondering what coming of age would look like in a world without boys, and what dynamics might be different. I was a Lord of the Flies fan, and I at some point had heard that they were considering a remake, and but using girls instead of boys. And a lot of people said, well, there's no way that could fly, because the Lord of the Flies, what happened on that island was due to toxic masculinity. So I wanted to sort of examine those types of questions. What would it look like on an island full of girls? And in terms of the actual setting, this idea that the girls live on a reclaimed garbage dump on a landfill, that sort of idea was based on a time that I was in Virginia, and driving down the freeway, there were these large sort of hills, and they just looked completely unnatural. It wasn't a landscape that looked sort of organic or real. And I remember asking the driver, like, what's the deal with those hills? And that's what they were. They were landscaped piles of garbage. They just put grass over them. So I had this interesting sort of idea of the hill. But one of the main reasons was I just wanted to write an adventure story for girls. You know, so much of the stuff that my daughter was reading at the time, she sort of went from the ponies and the fairies and that sort of those types of books, and then it kind of jumped straight to the Hunger Games. And I didn't feel there was a ton of sort of adventure out there. And I like being out in the wild. I was, you know, an air cadet, so I had, you know, done winter camping and built lean-tos and stuff. I regularly hike through the Rockies. So I just wanted a book where girls could be just kind of gritty and have an adventure and have some fun and get dirty, and just sort of show girls that were sort of tough and whole, and, you know, that they could cry, but also that there was a space for girls to be angry. Anger is sort of not an emotion that is often afforded girls. We're told to sort of behave and be good. And, you know, there's certain emotions that seem to be accepted. And I have two very emotionally whole girls, and they're the whole family sort of into combat sports. So that sort of came natural, the writing of that part. Yeah, so I guess I was kind of exploring a little bit of everything, and all these little sort of sound bites or anecdotes or visuals that I'd had, I guess, collected over the years sort of manifested into this story.
Fantastic. Well, it certainly works. And as some of the comments say, people are partway through and enjoying it. And if you don't think Lord of the Flies can happen, my first time substituting in an elementary school playground duty, it wouldn't take long, let me tell you. That's when I learned that lesson. But on that note, the girls seem, what I like about it is it doesn't fully devolve, right? So like that's the Lord of the Flies premise, right? That, you know, and yes, it's allegorical in terms of the war, World War II, etc. But, you know, you managed to steer hard from cliches. So, and, you know, I even remember living with a roommate, one other female, for 3 years at university, somebody I'd met in residence, and people making the assumption that it's never going to work. Two girls can't live together, right? And the assumptions of that girls cannot get along. How did you steer toward against cliche, right? Like, was that a worry, or did it just happen naturally that you built these fully fledged girls who can be angry and sensitive and nasty, and who are all their own people.
Mhm. I think one of the things that worked for the book and what worked for these girls is that they each had a voice. You know, I think that's the other thing is women and girls, especially in groups of other girls, we don't often use our voice. We don't, you know, we don't confront each other when we're upset. We usually go away and it brews, and then we get more upset, and then we might talk about it with someone else, but we aren't, I don't think, confrontational by nature. And you know, I was sort of watching my oldest go through some of the dynamics with her friends, and just being like, this is not healthy. Like, you know, you need to have a voice, you need to address these things. So I think it's really critical to teach our girls to have a voice at a young age, to stand up for themselves, to ask questions, to call people out, you know, respectfully but firmly, so that problems can be resolved. I kind of think I don't want my kids going on Twitter and 30 years from now talking about something that happened to them now, and they're only just being able to talk about it, you know, 30 years in the future. And I know it's different, but the time is different. You know, this is also a book that's kind of a reconciliation between sort of old feminism, or the era in which I grew up or my mother grew up, versus the world that my own child is growing up. And it's quite different too. So, and that's sort of the role that the colony plays. So yeah, I think that was one way I was able to achieve that, was that these girls, you know, tell it like it is to some degree. And Quinn and Wren have a very sort of honest relationship with each other. And there's also there's no shame in this book. It was really important for me to write a book where there's no shame. So these girls, you know, some of them want to be mothers, some of them don't. No shame. You know, there's issues, you know, different sexuality preferences, and anyone that makes those, you know, decisions, there was no shame in that. So it was really important for me to create a story where girls could just be themselves wholly and have no shame in themselves, and the boys too, because I think that's really critical as well.
I think that's part of what makes this post-apocalyptic or spec fic book work, is that, you know, the future is never all dire. For sure, it's often mostly dire, and that's the warning it serves. But the fact, you know, my joke, my initial gut response when he said there was no shame in this book, I'm like, well, that's clearly fiction, because we all feel a lot of shame. But I think, you know, that's a nice reach, right? That's a lovely reach. Okay, I have to ask you, the cover. How did you feel? How do you feel? How did you feel about the cover? Look at this, people.
Oh, this is funny, because when I first got the cover design, there wasn't, I don't think, and Stacy might be able to correct me, I don't think there was exclusively boobs, but they were kind of provocative, and I kind of panicked a little bit at the beginning, and then went back to the designer with a, you know, or my publisher with a few comments, and then they came back with this design, and I was sort of like, oh, there's boobs on the cover. And, you know, my 9-year-old said I was a pervert for having a book with boobs. And, you know, my 13-year-old son was like, that's disgusting. And you know, it was really funny. But, no, from a marketing perspective, I was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's take a risk. And then she went a step further and said, what if we don't even put the title on the cover? And I said, yeah, why not? I don't sell books anyway, so I might as well take a risk and see sort of what happens. So, you know, I absolutely love the cover, and that again, that's another sort of thing between old generation and new generation. You know, if I was 15 and picked up this book at it, you know, back in the 80s, 90s, I probably would have been embarrassed because there was breasts on the cover. But I could tell you, like, my own kids, other than, you know, like my daughter is like, man, it's boobs. Like, it's a non-issue. So I found that really interesting too. Doesn't seem to phase that sort of younger generation. So I like it. I think it's, you know, it's a feminist press, and it's provocative and bold and confident. And I think that's the girls in the book are a bit wild. They're confident. They're sure of themselves. And again, it's a book where, you know, I try to exclude shame from the existence of these girls. They get to just be themselves, and body shame, of course, we all know as women is one of the biggest issues. So to put breasts on the cover, I think is quite progressive and risky and fun. And, you know, it seems to be working at the bookstore because people are picking it up, they're intrigued, and at very least they're wondering what it's about. So, and the
Absolutely.
thing is, some people don't see the breasts. Some people think, oh my gosh, was it a mistake? So I've had a couple people message me and say, was that intentional? Or do you know they look like boobs? And I'm like, yeah, it's all good. I know they're boobs. So yeah. And then you see the whole body, of course, when you spread them out. So yeah.
Yeah, there's a joke about this not being, you know, 50-year-old topography, but anyways, there'd be a few more valleys, but at least in my bodily topography. But it's so true. You know, I have a daughter the same age as your oldest, and I think it goes back actually even probably before, when our girls were just little, and female soccer stars started, you know, taking off the shirts, and you had a sports bra, and that was scandalous at the time, whereas now that's just,
wasn't that long ago.
That just a top, right? So yeah, I mean, more power to these girls who are owning their bodies, etc. So I also wanted to make a point too. I don't know if you can see this. I'll hold up my, I'll hold up my glass of wine for scale. It's not a huge book, right? Like it's such a neat size. If you don't have it, it's small. I measured it. I got it at the tape measure because I couldn't find a ruler, but it's 5 by 7. So it's a little size, and it's almost the size of a manual. And as somebody who's a bit of a stationary nut, the paper quality is just delicious, right? So those little things. So it's the size of a manual. And do you want to talk first about the manual? Should we do the first reading? What do you think, Ali?
I could do a really quick talk about the manual, and then I can dive into one of 2 readings. So the manual is essentially a book that the girls have to follow the rules, and those are dictated by a distant colony. They have not met the colony. They arrive there as babies, and they are raised as a group. And then when these girls turn 15, they go through a departure ceremony and they go to the colony. And a lot of what happens once they leave is sort of left out of the pages. And the purpose of the manual is the girls have to learn how to do everything. So they have to learn everything from how to frame a house, to how to treat an infection, to how to skin a deer, to how to teach, you know, how to read. And you know, what kind of plants they can eat and use and consume on the hill. And then of course there's some very strict rules so that they remain sort of safe, because the hill is a clandestine operation that is not really known. It is a secret. So they are sort of, you know, really forced to rely heavily on the manual. Yes, and each chapter, at the beginning of each chapter, there is an excerpt from the manual that also kind of sets up what's about to happen. So I think if that's okay, I'm going to read. I'll read from the very beginning. Just a couple pages and it will kind of set things up. So chapter 1, section 5.8, all girls over the age of 15 must leave the hill. I stand on the hill's summit alone, like the spire atop a watchtower. Up here, the wind is violent. It rolls off the ocean 753 steps below and then charges up, stinging the cheeks and whipping the braids of girls as it climbs. If you're afraid of heights, don't look down. Don't look up either. You look up too quick, the sun will blind your eyes and freckle your face, while the clouds will yank you over the edge. And as much as you want them to soothe your wounds and cradle you like a baby, they'll let you drop. They'll even kiss you on the way down. Wren, Quinn hollers, you're going to be late. I glance at the sun, at the muted gold beam spanning the horizon, then look downhill. She's probably right. The collectors have already abandoned the grassy southwest slope. All that remains are the makeshift stakes and ropes they've used to grid off a steep portion of the hill and a trio of sad seagulls drifting in circles they can't seem to escape. Wren, Quinn calls again, cupping her hands around her mouth. You've got 5 minutes. I grab my shovel, light as kindling with its splintered handle and dull blade. I inherited it from a previous collector whose name is still carved into the shaft, Pippa. I lift the patch off my right eye and take a final, dizzying look down. 41 girls mobilized towards the giant rock in the middle of the hill. In a few minutes, a departure ceremony will release 11 of them. I slip the patch back on and blink, adjusting my lashes. Am I blind in that eye? Partially. Probably would have been fully blind if I hadn't started taking the patch off when no one was around, willing the muscles to perform. I should leave it off altogether, see whether I can restore my vision completely. But other than the threadbare clothes on my back and a square of replacement patch fabric and a few elastics, it's all I had when I arrived here, and it's all I'll have when I leave. Always wear your patch. Wren, louder this time. Quinn's fist rests on her broad hips, her chest proud and lips pursed. An angry goddess, my best friend. I've already begun the descent, skidding down the steep parts. The treads of my boots are worn and smooth as sea glass. I use the shovel for balance. Coming, I shout. She waits impatiently, hanging off the spear, which she's driven into the ground like a spike. Loose rocks slide beneath my feet and I nearly fall. I'll just meet you down there. Quinn throws her hands up, rips the spear from the ground, and stomps further downhill toward the departure ceremony. Her black hair, tangled like a mass of seaweed, bounces with each step. Girls in her way clear a path. I ditch my shovel on top of a heap of tools and poke my head through the quarter's crude opening. It's less a door and more a ragged hole, girl height and suitably wide. The entire shelter is built into the hillside and smells like spring and unwashed hair. Cozy. No one inside except for Ember. Come here, you. I slap my thigh and she jumps up, pressing her paws into my rib cage, forcing me to take a step back. I inspect her face. You're filthy. She wags her tail and turns in a circle as I pluck a twig from her fur. Are you coming? Her bark makes me flinch. I twist my hair into a knot on top of my head, using sweat to smooth down the flyaways. It must be 1,000 degrees, the kind of heat that bends your vision and burns your shoulders. Let's go then. After the departure ceremony, the 11 girls will be gone. I am not one of them because I am 14 years and 363 days old. The number of days is significant. Those 2 days keeping me 14 are what separate me from the girls who go. It's simple, but there's another thing about those days. They make me the oldest one left behind, and that detail alone makes me the head girl. So I'll stop there for a little bit.
Fantastic. That doesn't make me want to jump in. It's interesting, having read to the end, now to hear the beginning again. I think it's quite delicious. Let's dive right in to the relationship between your narrator, Wren, and her BFF, Quinn. So tell me about their relationship. Is interesting. Could you expand more on what you were trying to do there without giving too much away?
Sure. Well, they are best friends. This is a very tight, small community. Girls are coming and going depending on their age. They also have sort of different assignments on the hill. It's very organized. Quinn is a hunter and Wren is a collector. So by collector, she's one of the girls that has to dig up the landfill because most of what they use on the hill are stuff that they have to reclaim from this garbage dump. So they have very different roles and sort of opposite personalities, but they complement each other. And they were sort of the first people, to connect, I guess. Actually, when Wren arrived, Wren is different from the other girls in that she came late. She came around the age of 4. So it was a very different experience for her. And Quinn sort of latched onto her right away. So they are best friends, but there are some fluidity there in terms of their sexuality, because of course they have grown up on this island without the exposure or connection to boys at all. And they are 14 years and 353 days old. So, they are exploring a little bit, and that relationship is complicated, of course, when they meet boys for the first time, because Wren has an immediate sort of feral attraction to the boy that she meets. And so that relationship is changed because of that. And ultimately Quinn has feelings for Wren. She's always sort of had them. Wren has sort of seen the relationship more as best friends, and it evolves accordingly. It is a sort of dystopian world, so I avoid using labels. I think that's more reflective of what we hear about, gender or, fluidity in terms of sexuality. So I just wanted these girls to be figuring it out as they sort of went through the book and were experiencing life. And again, doing that without any sense of shame as they went through that journey.
Yeah. That's awesome. And teen girls, as those of you who have parented one, well, teen, any boys or girls, you know, they feel things strongly. We know this. And what's interesting about The Hill to me is that they've had to be, I mean, a lot of things are interesting, but they've had to be mothers to each other. They've had to be best friends, and they have to be and they're intimate, right? At some level. So there's so many roles, and that fluidity makes absolute sense. Yeah, there's so many issues this book takes on, but what I might like most is it's not an issues book, if that makes any sense. So there's female complexity, fluidity to the friendships. There's the patriarchy. There's climate change, to name a few. But there's also an incredible amount of humor. And you might miss it if you're just reading it. Well, I don't think you'll miss it, but it's delicious in there. So, you know, it's almost like this Macbeth moment, right? Like Macbeth kills Duncan, the king, and then all of a sudden drunk dudes at the door. But it's not that slapstick. It's nicely done. Like, was the humor intentional? Did it just come? I know your other books are really funny. By the Figs, by, you know, Allie's other books for sure. But this one, you know, is far more serious, but there's moments of humor. How intentional was that? Or is it just your voice popping through?
I think yeah, it was probably the voice. And, you know, it's, again, if you're going to try and create girls that are sort of whole, then, you know, they are going to be all the things that I see in girls. I think girls are funny. I think, you know, I can listen to my daughter and her friends, and they are, you know, the banter that goes back and forth is quite amusing. Girls on TikTok can be absolutely hilarious. So yeah, I kind of thought that they're going to have this sort of funny dynamic because they know each other so well. And also, I mean, from a structural point of view, if it was just tense and you know, all the time, we would need a break from that. So I just kind of like the dynamic between these two, where they were kind of able to make fun of each other at some point in a loving but joking manner, and just to kind of get over it and, you know, have those moments and sort of move on. So yeah, I don't know if it was really intentional. And of all the reviews, it really was only Eric Vollmers of the Herald that sort of picked it out. Like, you know, like it's funny. And I thought, oh, and no one's ever kind of mentioned that before, but I think girls are funny. So why not, you know, have some humor in there to break up a little bit of the madness, I guess, and the adventure aspect of it.
Absolutely. Do you want to set up a second reading for us?
Sure. So I think Leanne prefaces a little bit when she gave the description of the book, but essentially the book starts with Wren having to take over leadership of the girls on the hill because she was not of age to attend the departure ceremony. And within a few hours of her being on the job, one of the girls goes missing, and she's only 9 years old. And so Wren, who has been told essentially never to step foot off the hill, has a decision to make as to whether she's going to go after this young girl or remain on the hill and abide by the rules of the manual. So this is, so I'm going to skip ahead to chapter 5, and it starts with section 2.8, do not go into the East Side Forest. Arrow drinks soup from a bowl flanked by collectors double her size. When she's lapped up all the broth, she uses her hand to scoop out the curled greens and chunks of whitefish. A forager tosses me a blackberry. Use your spoon, Arrow. Done. She wipes her chin with her bare arm, sits proudly back on her heels, and gnaws on a piece of rye bread. Amber tries to lick her face, and she bats her away. Come here, girl. I eat the berry and sit on the ground, where Arrow crawls over and rests her head against my chest. She plays with the tiny rock hanging from the chain around her neck, rolls it between her thumb and pointer finger. Her eyes are heavy. Since when are you into nap time? I rouse her from her reclined position, bounce her on my knee. Her head falls forward. I push away the damp strings of hair that have fallen out of her knot and stick to her sweaty forehead. Where's Harlow? I whisper, trying not to arouse the interest of the others. Forest. Did you see her go into the forest? She nods and pulls from a satchel tied around her waist, a rock similar to the one dangling from her neck, except this one is blue and much bigger, about the size of my thumbnail. Where did you find this? I take it in the palm of my hand. The edges are scuffed and there's a hole whittled through the middle, a bead. That all you find today? No old quilts or rubber tires or glasses? She shrugs and closes her eyes. Not yet, I say again, noting that the toenail she lost on a previous dig is finally growing back in. Which forest did Harlow go into? The one by the hunting grounds or the beach one? Beach. She yawns, exposing a mishmash of crooked teeth. Did she walk in? Was she alone? Arrow yawns again and shakes her head no. No, she wasn't alone, or no, she didn't walk. I sit up, straighter now, every muscle in my body constricted, my mouth dry. No, she repeats. I separate the questions, reminding myself she's only 3. Was she alone? Yes, Arrow answers. Did she walk into the forest? No. She shakes her head and begins to fuss. I rub Arrow's back. Why would Harlow crawl into the woods? Unless she was sick and had to vomit, brought to her knees by fever or flu or spoiled food. I think of last night's crickets, nutty and charred, and I pick at a seed wedged between my teeth and shiver. She would not just run away, slipping out of line, crawling to escape detection. Even a mention of the East Side Forest made her cry. The manual terrified her. And if she had just upped and walked away like Tora, someone would have seen her. Someone would have stopped her, hauled her back by her hair. I begin to think Quinn is right and wonder why I believe a 3-year-old. A bird the size of my fist pecks at the ground and retreats. Maybe Harlow took Quinn's spear, knowing Quinn would have to go back for it, and when she did, she crawled away undetected. No one was watching the back of the line. There was opportunity, but why? Unless she wanted to die. Occasionally, some girls wanted to. I shift my position and look at Arrow. So Harlow crawled in? Arrow shakes her head. On her back. Wait a minute. I prop her on my lap so she's directly in front of me and blow in her face. She winces. Look at me. What do you mean on her back? She taps her shoulder blade. I'm confused. Like this. Arrow climbs off my lap and lies next to me on the grass. Her legs stretch out so that her knees fall to the side, and she extends her arm overhead. That's impossible, I say. You can't move like that. Arrow sighs in frustration and closes her eyes. Quinn nudges me from behind with her knee and I jump. Quinn, don't do that. You scared me. She rests her chin on my shoulder and whispers in my ear, you can move like that if you're being dragged.
If you're being dragged.
If you're being dragged.
All right. It's time for me to fess up. There is really only one place in the book where I doubted reality. Extremely doubted it. So, and when I questioned the willing suspension of disbelief. So the hill is landfill, right? Right?
Yep.
The girls on the hill salvage what they can, right?
Yep.
You're Canadian, right?
Yep.
Who throws away a perfectly good hockey skate?
That is a very good point. I had to put a hockey skate in there because this book I knew was being published in the US. And so that was my little nod to our Canadian hockey culture, is to have a hockey skate and to have these girls have no sweet clue what it is for, except that the blade is very, very useful to them.
Yes, and I started wondering, I started overthinking this, as a good Canadian is wont to do. Is like, is it climate change? They can't have ice anymore? But,
no, way too much into it. It was just no, it was just a fun sort of.
Love the hockey skate detail. So, kind of on that note, any bizarre internet search histories for writing this book, or can you even remember?
Oh yeah, there was things like how to make biofuel. Was an important one, and parts of a helicopter and plants that'll get you really high, which was a little bit scary, because there's lots of plants out there actually, just in Alberta and BC that will do the trick, but I had to have them get really high. So yes, that was the most of what I did, but no, there wasn't a ton that I had to do. I had to go back and look up this hill in Virginia to make sure that existed and that I didn't make that up or hear wrong, because I wanted it to be somewhat steeped in something that was possible. And lo and behold, it is true that they bury trash and landscape it, and it looks quite beautiful. But again, totally obscure because these hills all the side of the road look kind of unnatural. But yeah, that was it. I mean, the fighting stuff came naturally. I would just call one of my kids and say, show me how to get to an armbar from a single knee or whatever. And so they were quite helpful in doing those types of scenes. And then because it was sort of dystopian, and it's a sort of a post-climate change time, I was able to play a little bit with, you know, what the world might look like. So it's mostly water, and there's not a lot of land left. So it was kind of, I guess, fun, but also disturbing because, you know, when I started writing this book, it was again back in 2013. And it's changed obviously significantly since then, but you know, climate change wasn't really top of mind at that time. We weren't really having the conversations that we're having about it now. The, you know, Me Too and the whole sort of reemergence of a feminist movement wasn't happening at the time. It was quite sort of silent. So it's kind of weird that by the time this book sort of got to the point where it needed to be and it was being sent out, that all of a sudden it became sort of more relevant in a way that it was not, you know, 8 years ago.
Okay, let's speed things up here for just a second. Rapid fire round, single or very quick answers. Who's your favorite character? You get to pick one, only one.
Probably Quinn.
Okay, who's a character most like you?
Probably Wren.
Who's the character you'd most like to be like?
Roman, probably.
Who's the character your readers will love?
I think the girls together, the pair of them, Wren and Quinn, the two.
Wrong. It's Arrow.
Oh, little Arrow.
And Ember.
Yes, everyone always likes the dog. That's true.
Yeah. Who's Pippa?
You know, my girls are both, they're combined in Wren. Wren is Odessa's middle name, and Pippa wore a patch as a little kid. She had to patch. So I actually had the patch, and then I had to find a reason for her to be wearing a patch. So it's sort of a combination and a little bit of a nod to my daughters.
And the name Pippa is carved on the shaft, right?
It is. And there's a really bad Odessa in there who does bad things. And that was kind of she's my free spirit and my wild one. So yes, her name's in there too.
Okay, as we wind down, I just have to ask, is there a sequel? Is there a Hill 2? What's going on there?
Yep.
Because it kind of ends, I won't say it ends, it's very satisfying, but
yes, it is part of a planned trilogy, and I'm halfway through book 2, and it's called The Sea, so that gives you some indication of where the next book takes place. But I recently had someone veto that name, and they decided it should be called The Hillier. So I might just be calling it The Hill, The Hillier, and The Hilliest. So we'll see. I don't know if my publisher will go for that, but
superlatives for fun.
Yeah. So.
All right. What other question would you like?
Questions or anything for a little bit, or?
Yeah, we could. Is there a question you wish I asked, or if people want to pop them into the chat, or oh, there's an interesting fact. Post in the chat. Mount Pleasant Sports Park Hill in Regina was once a landfill decades ago, and in Winnipeg, I believe, near where I grew up, it's quite common to ski on them.
Yeah, there you go. You never know what kind of garbage you'll find now that everything is melting and the land is changing so much. So did you do your research in the plants? Did you do no, I did not do my own research because that particular plant is pretty terrifying. So it's called Jimson weed, and if you get to that part in the book and you find out what happens to Wren when she gets it, yes, you would not want to smoke it or eat it or consume it. But who knows?
Okay, we have a couple of questions in the chat. We'll start with this one. Tell us a bit about working with Daughter.
So Daughter is a fantastic publisher. They're a small feminist press. I love their motto because it's feminist books for everyone. So not just for women or girls, it's literally books for everyone. They're edgy, they are progressive. They have some fantastic books, particularly their kidlit. They have a whole series of like books for sucky things that happen in life. So they have a title called, Death Sucks or Divorce is Bad. So they're just a fantastic progressive feminist press. They were absolutely wonderful to work with. My agent was fantastic in really finding the right house and the right place for this book, because we were looking for a publisher around the time that dystopian was sort of dead. And so, so much credit has to go to my agent, Stacey Condla, who had a vision for this book and knew that it was different, that it, it was a different take on the dystopian narrative because of this sort of feminine edge and the climate sort of background to it. And so, yeah, daughter was just, right away they saw the potential and what we could do with it to kind of bring it to that next level. And they've been just wonderful to work with. And they published some really fantastic fiction essay collections, YA and kidlit, that is innovative and edgy and just like sort of the Girls in the Hills. So it felt like the right place and the right home for it.
And Daughter has been really good about getting it into probably especially US review sites. And may I just say, it's been incredibly well reviewed. There hasn't been a negative review. There was one review of a big journal, and this was their complaint, that there's a lot of action. So you're like, well, there is a lot of action, but and a lot of heart. Betty Jane has asked a question in the chat, and I'll just add to it. So the Hill in Virginia. So is it set in Virginia? Did you just take the Hill and translate it to Canada? Is it
transported it? When I see the Hill, to me, it's sort of in Alberta or BC. So it's kind of in the Rocky Mountains. We as a family watch a ton of the show Alone. So we were into the survival shows. We watched Naked and Afraid. And they did one season of Alone on Vancouver Island. And we went there as a family for the first time this summer. And I just love it there. I find it's a very special sort of spiritual place. And so, yeah, for sure, that's kind of what I'm picturing is it's sort of a combination of BC, Alberta. It was just these garbage dumps in Virginia that sort of, I guess, put the idea into my head. And that was 20 some odd years ago that I had seen them. And I just, it ended up becoming the premise. But it's a North American society. I didn't make it sort of more Canada, more US. It's just sort of, Rocky Mountains.
With hockey skate.
Hockey skates.
Yeah. We're going to wrap up pretty soon. Is there any other questions I can, or we can wrap it up? I know we're all a bit Zoomified.
Well, I want to say thank you. Publishing it's always a challenge. And, I sort of almost forgot to be excited about this book because I'd kind of been there, done that. And you never know when you'll have another one land or come out. And the support has been fantastic. And just to see so many faces here, I see girls on my soccer team who I love and I miss desperately. I have my cousins in here from Toronto. I have former students who are fantastic writers in their own right and friends. And I've had my former writing teacher here, Gwen, and my mom. It almost made me cry to see her log in because I miss her desperately. And she's in Nova Scotia. And it just means so much that you took time out to come to this launch. And I really hope you enjoy the book. It's quite different. It's very much a departure from my previous work, but I'm grateful for the support. And, it's been a funny week. I had a book club for the Figs yesterday and then a book club for the Figs the day before. So I've had this really odd, strange flurry of activity in my books. And it's wonderful to see all these wonderful faces. And I'm just very grateful. So thank you to everyone for showing up. And I think Kyle's going to pop on here and wrap things up. And again, thank you to Leanne. And I have to say thank you to my dear friend Bianca, who designed this necklace. So you'll know in the book that the leader has to wear a necklace. So the head girl does, and she custom designed this necklace for me. And it has fish hooks and all sorts of other interesting junk and tidbits that you would pull up out of a landfill or a beach. So thank you, Bianca, for making that for me.
And if you need one final push, why you should go to Shirtliffe Books or Glass Bookshop or whatever your nearest indie is. I just want to end by reading the beginning, which is the dedication. And so Allie's dedication is this: for my girls, Pippa and Odessa, who live wholly, wildly, brightly, boldly, and to the next generation of girls, go get it. And I think I'll pass it now back to Kyle at Shirtliffe.
And thank you, Leanne, for hosting so much and for just being a fantastic friend. And to Shelf Life Books and Glass Bookshop in Edmonton, thank you again for your support and for stocking my book and hosting my lunch.
It is our honor to stock your book. It's my pleasure to host the launch as well. Thank you so much for such an informative and entertaining evening. We have stacks of signed copies of The Hill in stock here. I put a link in the chat just a moment ago. I'll do it again before we wrap up here because these things tend to get buried. Please do place an order for it. We are very happy to be supporting Allie here, and we think you should too. Anyways, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and I hope you have a wonderful night, and we'll see you at the next one.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for showing up.